Hi, I'm Michaela,
And I'm Madison.
and this is our project, The Not So Spanish Flu. Let's begin with some background about the flu. The symptoms of the 1918 flu were just like the normal flu symptoms: fever, nausea, aches, vomiting, sore, dry throat, and diarrhea, with most cases leading to pneumonia. It originated from birds but mutated to spread among humans. All groups of people were affected by the virus, but pregnant women were most likely to die if they caught it. Unlike our seasonal flu, this flu took the lives of many young people in their 20s and 30s. A large group of people within this age range would be soldiers, and that is who we will be focusing on. We will also be discussing the roles of women played in caring for the sick and how they shaped organizations such as the Red Cross. In 1917, the United States entered the Great War, known to us today as World War I, drafting millions of young men to live in close quarters and exhaust themselves by fighting day and night. These young men would travel the country to begin training. They then would travel the world to fight. They would take leave and come back to rest at bases in the U.S., carrying with them a deadly virus. In the beginning, men would be taken into camps on American soil to train. Camps like Forrester, Greenleaf, Upton, and Funston, which on March 4, 1918, would announce its first identified cases of influenza, with 1,100 of its 56,222 troops sick. These camps acted as breeding grounds for influenza in American troops, and even increased infection in civilians who lived near the bases. Just as quickly as these camps were popping up, so were they being infected with influenza. Essentially, the Army unintentionally grew their own epidemic. Not only were American troops spreading influenza within our borders, but they were also spreading it across the Atlantic. At Camp Fremont, soldiers were quarantined. Only married officers with families living close could leave the camp. Once they were at home, they could not have visitors. All amusements in the camp were closed. The only way to have any types of amusements were to be held outside in the open air.
The epidemic running rampant throughout the United States created fear and demand for things people never thought they would need, such as caskets and grave plots. This epidemic almost broke the United States. So many people were sick that industrial plants were having to shut down due to no one being able to work. Some officials ignored the dangers that they were facing and continued with their normal lives. Other towns implemented social precautions such as social distancing, wearing masks, closing of schools and churches, and other public places. Some towns would put up signs telling people not to stop, the town is quarantined. Caskets would be placed outside and stacked due to the influx of new bodies every day. Children would climb on top of the caskets and play on top of the dead as if this was their normal. The orderly life in America was crumbling. People were afraid to talk to one another. They were living in deadly fear, and in some instances, violence began to break out. People were scared and not sure of what the future held. Many thought this was their end. Hospitals were overcrowded and understaffed. Most of the doctors and nurses were across the sea helping with the war effort. This caused the need for people to step up. Many women began to organize and create organizations such as the Red Cross. Women became influential in taking care of the sick. They sacrificed staying at home and raising their children to help on the front line. Some would take up the care of 8 or more sick patients and then go home and take care of their family, who was possibly also sick. During this time, women were still fighting for women's suffrage. With the men away at war, women now took on the roles of men. Some women took their husband's role on the farm, and others worked more satisfying jobs due to the opportunity that arose from men being away. This was also true for the African American. They could now work the better jobs. They, however, did not receive the same pay as if they were a white man. After the war, the men who came back received their jobs. This left women with the fuel and desire to continue working outside of the home, and some to desire to go to college. The influenza epidemic helped give women the momentum to get the 19th Amendment. They had to become wage earners. The National Woman's Party would picket outside of the White House with banners asking Wilson, "How long must women wait for liberty?" In 1919, women were given the right to vote through the 19th Amendment. The overall picture of the epidemic in 1918 through 1919 was the challenges people were faced with. A lot of Americans were having to learn a new way of life, wearing a mask everywhere you go and not being able to visit friends and family because of the fear of spreading influenza. With the precautions officials were putting into place with limiting social gatherings and requiring city ordinance that stated individuals and doctors must document the number of influenza cases. Also, the lack of knowledge about the new strand of influenza left doctors in the dark. There was no cure. They were just attempting new methods and different treatment options. Many Americans relied on folk remedies. There was a new surge of fear and no hope throughout the United States. The new need for coffins and medical personnel dictated lives. African Americans also became important in fighting in World War I and taking on better jobs in the U.S. Soldiers were being drafted and being sent to their death, a death they did not sign up for. Influenza ran rampant throughout the camps they were stationed in. When talking about this period,
World War I is the big picture people see. However, you cannot look at the years 1917 through 1919 without the mention of influenza. Influenza changed America economically, politically, and in the way the United States handles future epidemics and pandemics. Today in the United States, we have flu shots in hopes of preventing an epidemic.